Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Wrap. Today we are super excited to have one of our own, Mr. Victor Jacobsen, be part of this episode to share his tips and tricks on how to do tech recruitment. So, being an Amby veteran with us since 2017, I believe, Victor has been working with a lot of our coolest clients, companies such as Gravity Sketch, Sanity, and Noah, Schibsted. The list is long. And Victor has a unique insight into the candidate market and great knowledge of different technologies. But he's also taken the route from not being a developer or tech aware to become a tech recruiter. And that journey is difficult for a lot of people. And that's also what we're going to focus on today. So very happy to have you here today, Victor.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind introduction, Tor. Very happy to be hopefully sharing and imparting some of my knowledge today.
So let's jump into the material. So what do you see as the most challenging about moving from being an HR professional, a generalist recruiter, into tech recruitment?
Yeah, I think maybe to give some context to the listeners as well, I'll give a little bit of my background, just moving into HR and tech recruitment. Obviously, I have maybe an untraditional background within development studies, a bachelor focused on that and the implementation of technology in development countries. And then I have a couple of years within sales experience and also almost 7 years working in psychiatric ward and psychiatry before I jumped into HR. So I might not have the standpoint from the traditional HR representative or talent acquisition consultant. Or for myself, at least, there's definitely some obvious challenges when you're moving into tech recruitment space. I think especially like everything related to the job requirements, the personas that you are recruiting for, and truly understanding that aspect and putting them into the organizational growth chart and talent acquisition strategy is a lot different from maybe traditional HR. And understanding the people that you're recruiting for, right? These are individuals that maybe a lot of HR, TA people, they might not have extensive experience with technologists or people working within the product space. They might not be within the same kind of social culture as well. It's a completely different world and bubble. For myself, I have a lot of friends within that space, so I think it was easier for me to transition into tech recruitment than maybe traditional HR recruitment professionals.
Makes sense. What was sort of the first steps that you took to come up to speed, to understand the lingo, to really connect with the developers of the tech talent?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest kind of steps to take to gain both knowledge and the trust as tech recruiter is like first you need to learn the basics. So you need to kind of familiarize yourself with the fundamentals, with the programming languages, even though you might not possess like in-depth knowledge of the different programming languages and all of the kind of lingo that goes within tech recruitment and tech specifically. It's understanding like the common programming languages that are being used and how they're being utilized at the different facets within product and tech development. And understanding how you can emphasize your own kind of recruitment methodology using that knowledge, right? So how can you do a traditional recruitment process, but implementing your knowledge of both the domain and the tech side, as well as the product things that come in hand. So just like the basics, getting the lay of the land, understanding who the major players are, and almost for myself at least, it was like creating a mind map where I mapped out all the different programming languages and understanding how they intertwined and connected with each other, understanding that interaction between the front end, the back end, how is DevOps both a mindset, but also tools and systems that can be implemented across the different pipeline and software development cycle. And seeing that maybe in some specific cases, I definitely think it's very important. So maybe not try to do everything at once, but definitely segment the learning stages so you can build upon that as you working with different clients, working with different products, I think is a great way to take that step in your understanding in the tech recruitment game.
Hmm. I think it's a very valid point. Any I don't know, any literature, blogs, people which you remember that sort of brought you from 0 to 1 in terms of your understanding?
Yeah, I think it's the developers themselves. I think that was definitely my first step into tech recruitment is kind of being understanding and actively listening, even though you might be an HR or TA professional with 5, 10 years experience in the game,
Hmm.
and really being humble in what knowledge you might not have and what knowledge you're seeking to acquire, right? And actively talking with the developers and the people that you're going to be collaborating with, and really having that kind of passion and mindset to really understand what they're working on, to get that growth. Whereas you have a lot of good material, like you have TechCrunch, for instance, which is a great source. You have Hung Lee, which is a recruitment professional with a newspaper called Recruiting Brain Food, which is great material to kind of go there and subscribe to his newspaper. You also have a person called Jan Tegze. He has a book as well. It's called Full Stack Recruiter, focused a lot on tech and implementing that as well. So finding those recruitment professionals within the industry that you can follow, but also going out and seeking the people that you're looking to recruit, and just have coffee chats, be open, be curious. I think it's a great step.
Makes sense. Makes sense. No, I think I can definitely relate to that. There was a lot of no agenda coffee chats with developers early days, buying
Yeah,
them coffee and just sitting it down for hours, just picking their brains on the tech space and also recruitment and what pushes them to change a job and what makes an employer attractive. So I
yeah,
definitely follow that, and I think doing this in a like a parallel route, like getting operational experience, but at the same time upskilling yourself, and for that to go hand in hand is extremely important. Um, any moment in time where you sort of got that feeling, aha, now I get it. Now I'm sort of proficient as a tech recruiter.
yeah. Really good question. I don't think I've had one single moment where I've been like, wow, yeah, now I fully understand everything, because I'm still humble enough and I'm knowledgeable enough that I know that I don't have all the knowledge. But I think it was when I was working for um, Schibsted, which is obviously one of the biggest companies in Europe and a big one here in Norway. And I was working on scaling the SRE team, the internal SRE team for Schibsted. And that team is supporting all the products and companies within the Schibsted umbrella. And really talking with those type of candidates and the tech lead on the SRE lead team, and understanding how kind of their product and function correlated with all the different services that were being provided with Schibsted, and their tech stack as well, and how we could implement that across the different companies. I think that's kind of the first time where I felt like I had a good overview of the front, back end architecture, SRE, DevOps, and how those products were kind of interconnected and intertwined into that system.
Makes sense. Makes sense. No, I think that's it's those are small aha moments, and I do agree. The more you learn, the more you don't know. You know that you don't know. So I think
Yeah,
that's the everyday of a tech recruiter. But it's sometimes nice to hit those sort of plateaus of understanding. So I definitely follow you on that one. Any specific throughout your career now? Any specific industries that you find to be difficult to recruit for? Any like I don't know if it's med tech, ed tech, any specific industries or roles that are difficult?
yeah. I think obviously every industry and every domain has their own kind of unique value proposition towards the candidate, and kind of just working on identifying that value proposition towards the candidate, you will immediately kind of find your way to entry on how you can do the outreach and how you can do the conversion of those candidates. Um, I don't think there's specifically like one domain or industry where candidates are really, really hesitant to enter. Either if it's in medtech, edtech, prop tech, sustainability, like there's always going to be candidates that have that kind of unique interest within that segment, right? I think it's more on the tech side. I think it's more difficult. If you have specific programming languages that might have become outdated, maybe they haven't gotten an update in a while, maybe the UI is really difficult to work with, maybe it's difficult to implement third-party providers or programs or tools into that system, or if you have a lot of legacy, right? If you're working for a company that might have a legacy stack of the last 30 years and you're just looking to kind of refactor and reprogram that into something newer, that's might not be the easiest way to sell that to a candidate. So I think for tech recruitment specifically, it's quite interesting in that way, since technologists usually they like to solve problems, right? And in most domains and industry, you have interesting problems, and it's just the way you kind of phrase it and present that to the candidates.
Basically what you're saying, humbly enough, is that you don't have problems with any industries. Is that what you're saying, Victor?
Yeah. Exactly. No, I definitely think there's an answer to every industry or every domain, but the most difficult part is if you're stuck on a legacy stack or something outdated. That's kind of where it's difficult.
I follow you, and I've also been surprised about how much more important technology is than the specific domain, and that impression is also supported by the surveys that are published, or reports that are published by Stack Overflow and GitHub, etc., about why the developers change jobs, and very much it's or very often it's related to technology and what type of problems they're solving. No, but cool. Okay. With the HR professionals that are taking that step into tech recruitment, let's say you started and you find it so difficult, complex, you're on the on the verge of giving up in a way. What's your sort of motivational, your Al Pacino speech to them?
My Al Pacino speech, yeah. 1 inch at a time, isn't that the one? Yeah, I think like going back to breaking it down into manageable increments of knowledge and understanding, and not trying to understand kind of the entire technology space at once, but really like doing one area and focusing on that, like whether it be front end or back end, or maybe it might just be Python. Let's just say you want to understand like how Python can be implemented across both the front and back end, or within like data science, right? And talking to people that are the industry professionals already at that space or at that specific tool that you're looking to gain knowledge on. And there will come a time where kind of that key is turned and door opens. So I would definitely say to stick with it if you're struggling, but maybe just break it down into smaller increments. Might be that you're trying to learn too much too fast, essentially.
Let's say that person is listening to you now and taking your advice, showing grit and start sticking with it. But let's say that person is making a lot of tactical mistakes and not doing the right thing. They might learn and know a lot about the industry, but sometimes they're just not delivering the results that, I don't know, their manager or CEO or whoever wants to see. So what are those sort of typical mistakes you see amongst tech recruiters?
Yeah, I think for tech recruiters, they might have the knowledge of what they're looking to recruit for. They might understand the job requirements. They might have been collaborating with technical experts within kind of the field and talking with developers in-house and understanding how they can do assessment of that part. But it's with leveraging kind of your existing knowledge on how you can attract those top talents and how you can really focus in on that communicational part. Because a lot of tech recruiters, they can do the sourcing, they can understand the product, they can understand the tech and the kind of requirements that go into the position they're looking to fill, but they might not understand the people, right? because technologists and developers, there are people like anybody else, just they have a specific field they're very good at. But there also might be personas within that field that are reacting to some specific way of outreach. So really going in to understand the communicational and outreach part of the tech recruitment, I think is key to deliver those results, and not just treat them as any other working group, but work on specific strategies for outreach and conversion for these type of individuals.
Hmm. Makes sense. Also think that because tech hiring is so challenging, a lot of tech recruiters think that the only answer is in the numbers. Of course, it's a numbers game. That's a big part of it. But I don't know, it wasn't it Einstein that said sort of doing the same thing over again and expecting a different outcome is insanity. And I think that goes a lot with like unfortunately how many recruiters think. So they just focus on sending, like doing a spray and pray tactic, contacting a lot of developers with the same messaging, a bulk email approach, and expecting that somebody will convert, rather than doing a proper research on the company, building that narrative, and also uh, presenting why that specific role is super relevant for that individual and why you actually took the time to research and contact that specific person with that job opportunity. Yeah, it should be a given, but with a push for time and volume, that's often it often results into bad recruitment and bad work, low conversion, bad reputation also for recruiters.
Definitely. And also having being able to relay your own passion within the field that you're recruiting for comes from an understanding of the basics of that product, of that technology, right? If you're recruiting a senior Java developer, you need to understand like what sort of issues is that developer going to solve for us as a company, and how can I relay that in an effective manner, right? Either if it's during a call or if it's in an email or email. And if you're able to present those things, then you need to really work on highlighting the company culture, highlighting values that the company you're recruiting for they're having, being transparent and honest in the recruitment process. I think it's incredibly important as well. A lot of companies and recruiters, they might overpromise, or they might be talking a specific position up in the clouds, right? But when that person is sitting there and doing the work, it might not be the reality of that day to day. So I think like emphasizing that transparency in the recruitment process, and as recruiters, we also have kind of responsibility to make sure that we're actually representing both the client and the day-to-day life of the dev in a proper manner, making sure that we're keeping those individuals for as long as possible within the company.
Makes sense. Makes sense. We've been talking a little bit about sourcing now with, I don't know, LinkedIn. We could use Stack Overflow. We could use other types of sources. But what about those more guerrilla style ways of doing recruitment? It could be networking events or more community inside developer communities, weird social media platforms, or not weird, but bit sort of non-mainstream platforms. What's your experience with how recruiters can leverage those?
Yeah, really good question. I think a lot of companies, they would like to utilize a lot more of the social media platforms in a more proactive way with recruitment. But I think there's kind of two different camps that you need to make sure that you're not stepping into, right? Because there's some spaces where you can do recruitment, then there's some spaces where if you do recruitment, you're going to do more. You're essentially going to step in the salad, right? To use that term. So for a recruiter, I think it's like understanding, like you say, Stack Overflow, going into GitHub and going into their profiles and really doing good research on how you can understand the individual that you're trying to contact. Whereas you also have, for instance, groups on Facebook, you have groups on LinkedIn, you have groups for that specific technology or that specific domain, and understanding who the players are, who's talking to who is kind of moving the needle in terms of that programming language, and how can you utilize that knowledge to kind of gain insight into who might have experience within that programming language, for instance. And having a very maybe like soft approach into those domains and groups, I think is very, very important. If you're just going in there guns blazing, saying, "Hey, I'm recruiting a Golang developer. You're the Golang group dev on Facebook. Here's my jobs." I think you're going to be kicked out of that group quite quickly. But if you're coming from that space of wanting to gain knowledge and wanting to maybe position your company as a player within that scope, then you're going to start seeing like passive candidates coming in. So,
sorry to cut you off, Victor, but
yeah.
how can you try to engage in those type of communities? What do you say? How do you sort of take part in the discussion without sounding too pushy?
Yeah, so that was my next point, is that like if it should be the recruiter or if it should be the hiring manager or the people that you have internally, right? So understanding that there might be some spaces or groups where you need to facilitate for the usage of your internal resources, right? So the technology experts within their field, they might not be working within those groups. They might not have knowledge that those groups existing, that there's a meetup within your local city, for instance. So you as a TA and recruitment professional, you need to be able to enable the people to essentially go out there and then talk to those individuals. So let's say you want to recruit a Node.js developer, right? And you have a lead Node.js dev internally, I would be working hand in hand with that person and putting that person either in those chats, in those groups, and facilitate for the person to go out there and talk to the other devs that are essentially in that space, right? I think a great way to do it is to have some sort of project that you can work on that you also want to emphasize within your industry. So it might not be client specific, it might not be specific to your product that your company is developing, but having some sort of maybe have a plugin or something else that you want to interact with that community is highly efficient.
Makes sense. I think that's a very valid point and a good point, because for a company, it's not only the recruiter's responsibility to recruit people. You need to get everybody involved, and to be able to build that credibility within a community, which is typically a for us by us culture, then you need to be credible in that sense. So very, very valid point in bringing the right people into the right groups. And also in terms of the offline events part of it, I think my experience is that that's obviously an investment, either sort of going to events or hosting events. But I've seen massive ROI on that. I've for some of our clients, I've definitely seen that they've hosted events, and a year or 2 years after, I see a lot of candidates or inbound candidates coming in and just sort of mentioning, I was attending your fireside chat and it was fantastic. Now I'm ready to move. But I think sort of those non-recruitment events that are not too pushy has a big effect on the brand, the employer brand. And I think definitely it's worth the investment if done right. I don't know if you have any experience with that you can share.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's specifically for maybe the junior professionals within the industry. They have a huge emphasis on going to those events, and that's a great maybe platform for companies to promote their product, promote their culture, being able to talk with people quite early in their careers as well. Whereas maybe more senior developers, they might have more specific communities that they are joining and meetups that they're going to. But for clients that we have worked with and myself have been a part of, we definitely saw a lot of those spaces being a great platform and meeting space to meet future talent. And leaving that impression early is quite important.
And building on that sort of employer branding and positioning, if you're let's say you're joining scale up 20 people looking to double size within a year, and you're coming in as an HR professional with limited tech experience, how would you address that challenge when it comes to positioning the company from an employer branding point of view?
Yeah, obviously smaller companies, they have a smaller budget when it comes to both recruitment, marketing, employer branding, and positioning. So I think the most important part, if you're a smaller company, is leveraging testimonials, leveraging reference cases, leveraging your network as well. Really working with the current employees that you have, either if it's a product or if it's a service that you're delivering, but creating that community with your customers, essentially, making sure that you are able to have them as well spread the good word. I think a client that I would like to emphasize is Sanity.io. They deliver a headless CMS. They're from Norway and they're now growing exponentially in the US and Europe. I think currently they're positioned as the number one CMS tool as kind of up and comer. But they did a great maybe positioning play, meaning that they created a really strong community where they are delivering a service for free for single developers to use and play around with their tool. And that ended up being having a community of thousands of developers essentially spreading the good word about Sanity.io and how incredible the tool was and how it's been helping them in their day-to-day. And then creating those Discord channels, for instance, where you can have communities and you can interact directly with the company and the people that are working there. Is on my top of to-do list if I'm moving into a product company.
Makes sense. Good. Okay, I want to look a bit more into the assessment part of it. We talked a lot about sourcing and employer branding. So what's your take on building a solid assessment process when hiring tech talent? What type of steps are we looking at? What type of assessment methods is ideal? It's a controversial topic.
Yeah. Let's be strategic when we're talking about this one. Just joking, but there's definitely a lot of strong opinions surrounding assessment, and there's a lot of strong opinions regarding what sort of steps you should have, and a lot of people are being quite flexible when it comes to recruiting maybe junior mid tech people versus senior plus tech people. But I think it all starts with understanding the job requirements and why you're looking for those specific skills, and then understanding the interpersonal skills that play together with those skills, right? And then what sort of essentially assessment methodology you want to be utilizing to assess maybe the soft interpersonal skills that is difficult to create a structured process with. So if you start with those stages, kind of what do they need on the tech side? What do they need in terms of interpersonal skills? How do we want that position to maybe be developing over time? What sort of interactions will they have with the different team members and the different product teams, right? And then how can we assess that in a structured manner? So setting up and collaborating with technical experts at your company, very important to make sure that the technical assessment is on point. I would always make sure that you have a structured interview, whether it being for the first interview or the second interview where you do the technical assessment, because most experts, they might be able to assess the technical skills, but they might not be able to structure their assessment, right? So they might be able to go into a room and understand, okay, this is a top tier developer within the first 20 minutes, but they might not be able to structure their feedback and knowledge back to the recruitment team. So I think having that full cycle where you're able to assess candidates as well as providing valuable feedback to the recruitment and hiring team so they can make iterations throughout the process is quite important. And then utilize a pre-employment assessment test, for instance, where you have personality and ability tests, understanding the link between those tests as well and how they can correlate into work-related tasks that they are going to be doing.
And I assume that's a bit of a hot topic in a way, given that developers tend to be a bit more hesitant maybe to see the link between the work that they're doing and what they're measured towards, if it's personality or ability tests. Any solid arguments on the one on the other side there, Victor, or any, I don't know.
To do a shameless plug of Amby, I would say that we've mostly we have quite positive feedback when it comes to personality and ability interviews. I
Mm,
think it's quite important to emphasize how you're using that assessment tool, not only in the recruitment process, but also
mm,
after the recruitment process has ended. And that goes with working with hiring managers for how they can essentially support their team's growth and the team members' growth throughout their career path, right? And utilizing that as maybe a framework to work towards PR conversations down the line as well. Um,
mm,
and a big part of the ability test is kind of understanding the transferable skills within tech, right?
mm.
Even though you might be, let's say, a Java specialist, you might have knowledge base and skills that are quite transferable to maybe other areas. And during a personality and ability assessment, you can essentially have an open dialogue and conversation how that person would like to maybe move within the space and scope. Yeah, it can be quite important.
And on the assessment topic, the technical off the shelf test, HackerRank, DevSkiller, these more standardized tests. How do you see them play a part in assessment?
Yeah, I think obviously there's going to be positives and drawbacks with any assessment tool that you are utilizing. I do think if you don't have a specific technical case, it's definitely a valuable tool to be using. But if you have those subject matter experts within the company that are able to create a work-related technical assignment that you can also make sure it is quite structured, I do think it's better to use a technical assignment essentially.
Yeah,
Um, for the
I agree.
codility and HackRank, it's the ease of use, right? It's
Yeah,
plug and play. You select the different tests, you can structure the assessment and also the kind of scoping quite easily. But there are issues with HackRank and codility, like if somebody maybe didn't have time to compile it or run it and check that their program was actually running and they just wrote a comma wrong or there was a space somewhere, they might get 0 out of 100%. Whereas if a technical person goes in and actually does an assessment, they see like, oh, he just missed this comma right here.
mm,
And when they remove it, they have 100 out of 100.
mm.
So just making sure that if you're using those automated tools, that you don't just take the score at face value. You still need to go in and you need to do the assessment of the answer essentially.
Yeah, makes sense. I also feel, especially, I agree with you. So I follow you on the doing more custom type of assessment, like that's designed towards your company and what you're doing. But I think like Codility and HackerRank, those are quite good at screening candidates. Like top of funnel, if you get a lot of inbound, that can take away some of the time in doing thorough assessment for hundreds of candidates, and you can use that and have a cutoff, and that will help you with regards to time. And I definitely
Yeah,
in this market and how where we see much more of job seekers than just a year back, then I definitely think those tools can be quite productive for recruiters out there.
definitely.
Good. What about reference checks? Let's say, okay, you've gone through personality test, assessment, you've gone through ability, you've gone through coding tests, and then you're left with one good candidate you really want to hire. How do you feel about reference checks? What do you, how much do you value them, and what are your tips when it comes to the reference checks?
Yeah, obviously, statistically, reference check has one of the lowest kind of reliability indicators when it comes to a hire and how they would be performing in a job. So it's not on my top three assessment tools or like process related tools that I would implement. I definitely know a lot of recruitment professionals and hire managers. They might be quite used to reference checks and might have an image of them being quite reliable and important to the process.
Mm,
But in my view, essentially, if you get to that stage where you're at a reference check stage, you should more or less be 99% sure that you're going to hire that person, right? Because essentially you're getting quite a select group of individuals that you're going to have a conversation with. And if you're doing even a backdoor reference check, you're only still getting quite a select group of people, right?
Mm.
And there might be a specific case or a scenario that happened with one person, and that might color the entire
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
also why like these backdoor references are best to become front door in a way. So try to get your candidates to, if you know somebody in the company that they work for, try to bring them up on the table and try to be open about that process. But I do agree. I definitely think that trying to do your homework to see if those references that are provided, are they relevant, and really dig into the details. If you've done your homework throughout the recruitment process, you probably found a lot of, or maybe some red flags, some topics you're curious about that you really want to do a deep dive into. And not everything you'll get in the recruit reference check is a disqualifier, but it's quite relevant information with regards to onboarding, to understand better who you're getting on board, etc. So yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely see the value of that.
definitely. And also maybe implementing a post reference check stage as well. If you're finding those red flags, orange flags in the reference check, maybe frame that in a conversation and open that door to have a conversation about those areas, and give the candidate the opportunity to maybe explain a specific situation or a specific way of working that might have shown up throughout the recruitment process, instead of just saying no, that we're not going to do the hire. No, it's a no-go. But opening that door for a dialogue, I think it's really important to create that trust and also create that stickiness within your brand and how you're handling a process.
Okay, so looking at the market now, how do you see that? We know that it's been a year of a bit more of turmoil and more dynamic environment when it comes to supply and demand on the talent side. How do you read the recruitment market for developer talent?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenging year for both sides. I think developers as well are heading into more uncertainty. At least in the US, we see a lot of massive layoffs within tech space. Also in Europe, we see a lot of layoffs happening. So specifically here in the Nordics, we're a bit more on the secure side, and people still have jobs. But specifically in like the consulting industry, it's quite harsh these days. Um, from the client cases that I'm working on and from the clients that we have in our portfolio, we definitely see some indicators right now that things are looking a bit more positive. We see more mobility within the candidate market as well, which might be positive, and people looking to move back into maybe a startup or scale up again. That's also a good indicator that people are at least optimistic that what we're going through is a passing period. Yeah, and that also goes on the hiring side. People are looking to scale up maybe from Q3, Q4. So that'll be quite interesting to see how that develops.
Cool. There's also a new kid on the block, ChatGPT. What's your take on that? Have you played around with it? Seen any impact on your day to day? Do you see it as a hype, or do you think it will be a game changer in the recruitment space?
Yeah, I've had a lot of time to play around with ChatGPT, both for assessment, job requirements, writing job descriptions, writing different email templates as well for the candidate market. Also for learning, I think it's a great tool, whereas you can utilize it as a learning tool for understanding the basics of tech recruitment or the different stages. So I'm definitely, it'll be quite interesting to see how it's going to be utilized across different domains moving forward, but I definitely think it's a tool that recruiters should be implementing and trying to use day to day to really get an understanding of how they can be more effective in a lot of kind of repetitive tasks that we have within recruitment. So definitely see it as a time saver.
Do you have any tools or systems that you use to succeed as a recruiter? I believe a lot of people listening to this podcast would be interesting take a look at your tech stack and do a due diligence to understand what you use, because we do get a lot of requests from different suppliers that are looking to sell us different software and tools with AI, of course, that will make our life 10x easier.
Yeah.
So what's under your radar? What's happening in Victor's on Victor's Mac?
Yeah, well, I'm using a Windows machine. Well, I'm using both.
Oh,
So I'm on both Mac and Windows. So I don't play no favorites. But for me, I think GlossaryTech is definitely a plugin that I think is immensely valuable for both tech recruiters or HR professionals. Super easy plugin to have. Gives you a brief kind of description of the tech, right? And you also have Tech Glossary, which is also another one that gives you an explanation and some bits of knowledge, essentially. But for my part, that's kind of the ones that I'm using on a day-to-day. Usually now, previously was the different mind maps and TechCrunch and the newsletters, yeah, that I'm focused on.
have you managed to use any outreach automation tools that has been working? My experience there is that back to our first point or earlier on in our conversation, is like doing your research, understanding why you're contacting that specific candidate. The fully automated part, at least on my end, or my experience, has not been according to my expectations. At least I think we still, yeah. And hopefully I might be
Yeah.
wrong, because there are some parts of this that would be nice for a machine to replace, but yeah, I haven't been that impressed with the ones that I have checked out, at least.
Yeah, I've tried a couple of automated outreach tools, but I think with tech recruitment, it's so incredibly important to make sure that's customized to each individual. And that's why I think like tech recruitment, it might be one of the hardest things to recruit for, because you need to do so much research prior to contacting that individual. Whereas all these automation tools, I definitely think they can help if you have maybe easier positions to fill, or if there might be a junior position, more commercial, more product related, right? Or if the sales position, might be easier to use those tools. Whereas the tech recruitment, you need to do your due diligence essentially, and you need to make sure that outreach is crisp and personalized towards that individual. Yeah. So I don't think ChatGPT will be taking that spot anytime soon, at least. But we can use it to essentially leverage and utilize it for that reach part.
Makes sense. I think that's what we had time for today, Victor. Thank you so much for taking time, sitting down to discuss tech recruitment. We could have sitting here for hours and discussed this. Really nice to pick your brain on key topics, and hopefully there are some valuable points here for an HR professional that is looking to nail tech recruitment, because you know what you're talking about. Really happy that we got the time today to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Tor. My pleasure.
All right. Take care.